At Pellington High School, a basketball game is in full swing. During a timeout, the coach gives instructions to his star players, Mason, also known as Horse, and Dean, on how to seal the win. When the game picks back up, Mason scores several key points for his team. Suddenly, he feels as though someone is watching him. Dean calls out his name, pulling Mason out of the strange daze. With the clock winding down, the team looks to Mason to take the final shot. As he shoots, he sees the burned man from before reaching out toward him. The ball drops through the net. The crowd bursts into cheers and the burned man disappears. Moments later, Mason hurries to his locker, skin crawling with goosebumps as he pulls it open. He takes out the ancient urn. The burned man appears again, moving closer. Panicking, and smashes the urn. The footsteps stop. Shortly after, his teammates gather around to celebrate his winning shot. Later, Mason steps into the shower. What starts as a calm moment quickly turns into horror. This time, the figure sets him on fire. Dean watches in shock as his best friend burns to the ground. 6 months later, Chris moves to the town of Pellington from Chicago after losing her father in a terrible car accident. So, she comes to live with her uncle and her cousin Ree. On the drive into town, she spots a towering steel factory where Ree works on weekends and a church nearby. About an hour later, she arrives at the house. Ree greets her with excitement, briefly catching her off guard. He offers to help unpack, and when he spots her vinyl records, he teases her for being old-fashioned. Soon after, he reminds Chris to get ready for her first day at Pellington High School. At school, Ree reads his comics as students stare at Chris. Ree begins pointing out the popular groups, starting with Grace. But Chris's attention drifts to Grace's quiet friend, who Ree introduces as Ellie. Curious, Chris asks who Horse is. Ree tells her it was Mason's nickname, a student who recently died from the flu. Just then, Mason's friends, Dean and Tanner, walk up to Chris and tell her she can't use the locker. She argues that it's the one assigned to her. Grace steps in, telling Dean not to make a scene. Trying to impress Grace, Ree compliments her hair. Dean smirks and asks if Chris is the new girl. Then he claims he heard a rumor that she just got out of rehab and even killed her father. Fed up, Chris kicks him between the legs. Unfortunately, their history teacher, Mr. Craven, catches the commotion and gives all 4 of them detention. Ellie insists that Chris did nothing wrong. Craven says he saw everything and assigns Ellie detention as well for lying. Moments later, the bell rings. Ellie apologizes for Dean's behavior and offers to help, but Chris says no. Chris then notices an ancient-looking urn inside her locker. Curious, she takes it out and opens it, finding a skull-carved whistle inside. She lifts it to her lips and tries to blow into it. Dean snickers at the use of her full name. As Chris sets her bag down, the whistle slips out and clatters onto the table. Dean immediately asks Mr. Craven whether the school allows drug pipes on campus. Chris quickly says it isn't a pipe. Craven gestures for her to bring it over, and she explains that she found it in her locker. Looking the object over closely, Craven notes that the carvings look like early Mayan script, or possibly. He tries to translate it, explaining that Kaba means to call out to something. Then he comes across another word. Grace quickly types it into her laptop and announces that it translates to summon the dead. When Chris reaches for the whistle, Craven quickly pulls it away, saying he'll hold on to it since it may have historical value. He lets detention out early. Soon after, Grace invites everyone to her house for a pool party. Noticing the way Ree keeps looking at Grace, she playfully asks if he has a crush on her. Meanwhile, Craven finds out that the whistle could be worth around $35,000. Wanting to check its condition, he blows the whistle. Satisfied that it works, he marks it as being in good shape. Outside the school, Ree tells Chris that Dean had no right to bring up her father. Chris shrugs it off and says it's fine. A moment later, Ree realizes he left his comic book in the classroom and runs back to get it. He spots Mr. Craven stepping out of the room. Outside, a young man walks up to Chris and introduces himself as Noah, a youth pastor from St. Mark's Church down the road. He asks if she believes in God. Chris tells him she's not really into religion.
Noah then invites her to visit his church to meet new people and have a good time. He pulls out drugs, offering them as a welcome gift. Ree quickly steps in, telling Noah to back away from her. Chris firmly tells Noah to stop. He calmly replies that God has a purpose for everyone and claims he's only helping those who are struggling. Parents send their kids to his church. He sells drugs to the kids. He adds that one of them overdosed a year ago. However, when he opens the urn to check the whistle, he finds it is gone. Craven figures the janitor Charlie might know something about the missing whistle, so he calls out for him. As he steps into the hallway, he notices a pale, sickly-looking man standing nearby. Craven tells him the school is closed and that he is trespassing. Suddenly, Charlie appears behind Craven, startling him. Still shaken, Craven mutters that he needs to go lie down for a while. "Mr. Craven, your secret's safe with me?" When Craven looks confused, Craven goes back to his classroom only to find the sickly man waiting for him inside. Suddenly, Craven begins coughing violently as his lungs start to give out. Within seconds, he collapses and dies. Meanwhile, Ree and Chris arrive at Grace's house for the pool party. Then, Ree shows everyone the whistle. Dean jokingly suggests calling his grandfather, but Grace quickly points out that his grandpa isn't dead yet. She then spots her little brother Timmy nearby and firmly tells him to go back to his room. Looking the whistle over, Grace admires its detailed design and calls it beautiful. Ellie, who works part-time at the ER, quietly says that death is anything but beautiful. Dean dares his girlfriend to blow the whistle. Chris makes it. Grace lifts the whistle and blows into it. After a few seconds, Dean suddenly asks if anyone else can hear that. Chris says her goodbyes and starts to leave, but Ellie stops her and invites her to the local harvest festival the next day. Chris hesitates for a moment, then smiles. Just then, Ree rushes out and tosses Ellie her diabetic insulin pouch. Ellie thanks him, then tells Chris she's late for her hospital shift. Before leaving, she asks Chris to text her about the festival and tells her to get her number from Ree. Then Chris asks Ree if Ellie is straight. Ree shrugs and admits he doesn't know. Later that night, Chris lies on her bed, typing out a text to Ellie. She deletes it, rewrites it, deletes it again. As she stares at her phone, she suddenly feels like someone is watching her. She looks toward the window and freezes. The door suddenly swings open without a knock, and Ree barges in, startling her. Then she notices in horror that she accidentally sent the last text she was still writing. She panics, but Ree tells her to calm down and sends Ellie a reply himself. Meanwhile, by the pool, Grace is working on her homework when she begins to hear faint breathing nearby. Thinking it's her younger brother, she ignores it until the sound keeps going. Feeling uneasy, she gets out of the pool to check. She suddenly hears someone running behind her and turns around. Just then, a hand gently touches her cheek. She spins around and sees Timmy standing there. He calmly tells her that their mother wants to speak with her. The next morning, Ree and Chris join the others at the school assembly. Ellie quietly tells them that Mr. Craven died the night before because he had stage 4 lung cancer, and doctors said it was a miracle he had even been on his feet the day before. Ellie then notices a hooded figure several rows ahead of her, appearing to have a seizure. The figure slowly turns toward her and seems to mouth her name. Grace hands the whistle back to Chris, saying she doesn't want it anymore. Chris suggests they simply return it to Mason's family. So, Chris and Ellie head to Mason's house. On the way, Ellie notices Chris's tattoos and asks why she hides them. Chris brushes it off, saying it's personal. Ellie gently asks how she decides. Chris knocks on the door and it slowly creaks open. They step inside. Moments later, Mason's grandmother, Ivy, comes downstairs. She mutters that she wants to die in this house. Then, Ivy leads them into a room filled with strange and occult objects collected from around the world. She explains that she gathers them as memento mori, reminders of death. Chris asks if the whistle belongs to her collection, explaining that she found it in Mason's locker. Ivy shakes her head and says she didn't find the whistle. The whistle found her, just as it found her daughter and her grandson. Chris asks what the whistle actually does. Ivy explains that it is called Inchoka, meaning the cry.
It is a stolen relic taken from a plundered people long ago. Chris mentions that they translated the carving as summon the dead.
Ivy gently corrects her. Summon your death.
She explains that the moment a person is born, their death is born alongside them. From that day forward, it searches for them. If someone is meant to die at 90, death will take 90 years to find them. But if they hear the scream of the whistle, the call of Inchoka guides death straight to them, far sooner than fate intended.
Chris, shaken, asks what death looks like. Like you, Ivy replies. It becomes what you would have been in your final breath. Chris swallows hard and asks what happens if someone doesn't want to die. Ivy simply tells her that you should never have been born.
Outside, Ellie tells Chris that Ivy is heavily medicated and recently lost Mason, noting that grief can cloud a person's mind. She adds that there is no scientific basis for what Ivy is saying. Chris nods, then asks Ellie if she thinks Mr. Craven might have used the whistle, just like Mason did.
Maybe their files will be at the hospital I work at.
Later, inside the hospital's medical records room, Ellie admits that something about Mason's death never added up. He supposedly caught fire inside a shower cubicle, and the school blamed it on a gas leak, but his body was so badly burned that dental records had to be used to identify him. Suddenly, a doctor walks in, and the two girls scramble to hide behind a shelf. Chris grabs Mason's dental record, then asks how old he was when he died.
17, Ellie replies.
Chris scans the coroner's report and notices that the bone density and structural analysis points to someone in their late 40s.
Chris repeats Ivy's words. You will become what you would have been in your last breath. Ellie pieces it together.
Mason was meant to die in his late 40s, but because of the whistle, his death found him early. But Grace gently turns him down, telling him he'll make someone far better than her very happy one day.
Grace walks over to Dean and suggests a game.
She'll go into the hay bale maze, and he has to wait 2 minutes before coming to find her. If he finds her before she rings the bell at the center, he wins. Meanwhile, Chris and Ellie arrive at the festival. Chris tries calling Ree, but he doesn't pick up. Before they can look for him, Noah shows up again trying to sell drugs.
Chris watches, unimpressed.
Then Noah pulls out his knife, claiming he wasn't trying to hurt anyone. Chris grabs the knife and demands to know about the boy he killed with his drugs.
Noah insists he has no idea what she's talking about.
Chris cuts his nose, leaving a gash. Inside the maze, Grace runs, laughing nervously as haunted figures jump out to scare her. Close behind, Dean and his friend enter after the countdown.
As Grace moves deeper into the maze, she hears someone calling her name. Grace runs.
Outside the maze, Chris asks Ree where the rest of the group is.
The maze, I guess.
After winning a teddy bear, Ree joins them at the maze entrance, and the three of them rush in. Grace frantically calls Dean, whispering that a creepy old woman is following her. Dean laughs, telling her it's part of the haunted attraction, but Grace's fear grows stronger. Grace drops her phone and screams.
Desperate, she grabs a nearby shovel and swings it at the old woman's head.
The hit knocks the woman sideways, but Grace also falls hard, groaning in pain.
Grace pushes herself back up.
She touches her temple and pulls her hand away, seeing blood, just like the old woman she struck. Moments later, the old woman gets up again and Grace runs. Somewhere deeper in the maze, Dean calls out her name over and over, but gets no answer. Grace races through the maze, desperately calling out for Dean. She spots a narrow gap in the hay bales and squeezes through. When she turns around, the old woman is right behind her. The figure lunges and grabs her, but Grace breaks free and stumbles forward. Finally, Grace spots the bell at the center of the maze and drags herself toward it. Gathering the last of her strength, Grace rings the bell. The loud clang echoes through the maze. Later, Dean says the old woman couldn't be Grace, but Chris looks at him steadily and
of old age. She's 18. Dean snaps.
Ellie reminds him that when Grace blew the death whistle, they were all there. It summoned their deaths.
I feel it watching. I've seen it too. Dean scoffs, refusing to believe any of it. He says he's going home and will wait for Grace to call.
Then Dean blames Chris, insisting that all the strange things started happening the moment she arrived in town. Ree steps in, pointing out that Dean was the one who dared Grace to blow the whistle.
Your fault, she's dead.
Dean shoves Ree to the ground and coldly tells him that someone like him could never end up with a girl like Grace. Standing in the corner. Panicked, he switches on the light and the figure disappears.
His father knocks on the door. Dean claims he just had a nightmare, but his father isn't convinced. He asks if he has been drinking again and warns him not to drink and drive, saying it could very well be the death of him. At Ree's house, Chris asks Ellie how he's holding up. Ellie explains that Grace was his childhood crush and that he's heartbroken. After a heavy silence, Chris confesses something she has never told anyone. A year ago, she overdosed. Her father found her unconscious and rushed her to the hospital. On the way, a truck slammed into their car. He died. She survived. Ellie softly says she's sorry. Chris says she keeps listening to her father's music because it makes her feel close to him. Ellie leans in and kisses her. Chris pulls back, surprised, and laughs nervously, saying she's not as smart or put together as Ellie. Ellie smiles and replies that she is chrysanthemum. This time, Chris kisses her back. Out on the terrace, Ree suddenly has a vision of himself being crushed by machinery inside the steel factory. The next morning, the trio visits Ivy, who is now on her deathbed. Chris tells her that the whistle has taken the life of one of their friends and asks what it wants. Ivy explains that ancient civilizations once offered souls to satisfy their gods of death, and that Inchoka has been collecting them for thousands of years. Ellie asks how they can stop it. Ivy replies that death cannot be stopped and that once it is summoned, it will not let go. But she reveals that there is one way to change its path. When death is near, they must mark their blood on someone else, offering a new soul to Inchoka. Suddenly, Chris sees her own death standing nearby. With her last breath, Ivy whispers that death is not a choice, but living is. Ree considers the idea of sacrifice. Chris and Ellie immediately say no. Chris admits she saw her own death. It looked like she would overdose in the future. Desperate, Ree tries once more to convince them, but when they refuse again, he storms out. Meanwhile, Dean watches a news report about the Pellington Harvest Festival tragedy. Authorities have recovered the body of an unidentified elderly woman. His bedroom door creaks open. He sees the same bloodied figure again. His father calls from outside asking if he is okay. Dean doesn't answer. Instead, he barricades the door, terrified the creature will get in. His parents pound on him. In an instant, Dean's body twists violently as though he is caught in a high-speed crash. His parents finally break the door down and scream at the horrifying sight. Later, Chris and Ellie reach Ree's house, but he's nowhere to be found, so they head to the steel mill where he works. At the same time, Ree storms into the church with a gun. He orders Noah to come with him. As the church bell rings, Ree loses focus for a split second. Noah grabs the gun and tries to fire, but the magazine is empty. Ree takes the moment and knocks him out. At the steel mill, Ree ties Noah to a chair. He tells him this is where he is fated to die, so this is where Noah will die. Ree slices his palm, getting ready to mark Noah with his blood. Noah asks in panic if this is some kind of black magic. Goosebumps run down Ree's spine. He knows his death is close. Just as he moves to mark Noah with his blood, Chris and Ellie rush in, shouting for him to stop. Ree, shaking and desperate, argues how someone like Noah, a murderous lowlife, gets to live while they die. In the end, Ree can't bring himself to go through with it. He whispers weakly that he guesses everyone has to die once. Before she can explain, Ree's hands are caught and shredded by unseen machinery, and in seconds, he is gone. Chris sobs as Ellie comforts her. Then, with fierce determination, Chris vows she will not let death take Ellie. Chris then lays out her plan. They have to trick death into thinking they're already dead, but only briefly. Chris spots the insulin Ellie carries for her diabetes and asks if there is enough to stop the heart for a few minutes. She tells Chris that insulin alone will not cause cardiac arrest. Then she pauses and says she has another idea. Chris asks Ellie to bring the supplies inside when she is done. Chris goes inside and comes face to face with death. Moments later, Ellie enters and prepares the medicine.
While Chris sets up the ice bath and gets the defibrillator ready, she offers to inject Ellie first, but Ellie refuses, saying she needs to make sure she survives. Within seconds, Chris collapses. Ellie carefully lowers her into the ice water, hoping to protect her brain while stopping her heart just long enough to fool death.
Meanwhile, Noah comes to. He grabs the gun and stumbles outside. Ellie begins resuscitation. She checks for a pulse. Nothing. She starts compressions. Still nothing. Chris stays motionless. Ellie hears the shutter screech as Noah tries to force it open. Her hands shake, but she refuses to quit. Then Ellie sees it, her own death standing behind her, staring at her. At that same moment, Chris comes face to face with her own death. They struggle. The figure overpowers her. Then Chris remembers Ivy's words. Dying is not a choice. But living, that's up to you. She focuses on Ellie's voice, faint but steady, calling her name. The shot grazes her and she cries out, but she doesn't stop working on Chris. Chris eventually comes back to life and notices Ellie's death nearby. Noah raises the gun again, ranting that God has a plan for everyone, that he's only helping those in need, and that Chris is beyond saving, grotesque figure standing before him. Terrified, he fires at it wildly. Then he dies. 3 months later, Ellie and Chris are officially a couple, stronger for everything they went through together. Meanwhile, a freshman named Asha opens her locker and finds an ancient urn inside. Later that day during the school assembly, Asha is introduced as the new student who will perform the national anthem on her violin. She steps up to the microphone, lifts the whistle, and blows.